This morning, I have a mini mystery for you. That's a mini mystery. It's not a major mystery. It is not like, what is the purpose of my life? Or, how is God 3 and 1? Or, how does God know the future and then not know the future at the same time? Or, why can't I hit a golf ball the same time twice in a row? Can't ever figure that out. This morning is not a major mystery. This morning is a mini mystery. Now here's the mini mystery. What happened to the bitter herbs? I'm sure you've wondered this before. What happened to the bitter herbs? Maybe a little context will help you understand the question. Help us to figure out our mini mystery. As God was delivering the children of Israel from Egypt, He instituted a holiday to remember that deliverance. The holiday was called the Passover Feast. Now listen to God's instructions that He gave to the children of Israel as they were supposed to celebrate this Passover feast. In Exodus chapter 12, the first 8 verses. The Yahweh said to Moses, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the new year." Got it. "Tell the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this first month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or the goats. And you shall keep this lamb until the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat. They shall eat the flesh of the lamb that night, roasted on the fire, with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it." For the last 3,500 years, the Jews have celebrated the Passover feast. They've used, among other things, these 3 major elements: a lamb with its blood, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. Now, each of these 3 major elements have become powerful symbols down through the years. The blood of these lambs remembered the blood on the doorpost. It remembered their deliverance from the 10th plague. It remembered their salvation. The unleavened bread was symbolic of the need to obey the Lord in haste. We don't have time to let the yeast, we don't have time to do all the kneading. We don't have time. Just throw it in the oven, build it, and make it in haste. Be ready for the Lord. And on the Passover feast, every year for 35-something hundred years, they've used bitter herbs. The bitter herbs reminded them that they were once slaves. They were to remember their suffering. They were to remember their slavery. I think they were to remember the absence of God in their oppression. From the night of the 10th plague down through history, the Jews have been faithful to God in the observance of their Passover with the blood, the wine of deliverance, the bread of haste, and the herbs of absence in their slavery. Okay, that's our mini mystery. We're working on this mini mystery. What happened to the bitter herbs? Let's keep thinking. On the night Jesus was betrayed, He observed a Passover feast, like all good Jews of His day. Listen to Luke 22, beginning in verse 7. "Then came the day of the unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, 'Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it. And they said to him, where were we going to do this? And he told them, behold, when you enter the city, a man will come carrying a jar. He'll meet you. Follow him to his house and tell the master of the house, the teacher needs the room. And they'll show you a large room. And they went, Peter and John went, and found it just like Jesus told them. And they prepared for the Passover feast. Now, the disciples would have gone and purchased a lamb, probably from some vendor. They'd have taken that lamb over to the priests and had it slaughtered. They'd have taken that lamb to wherever they were going to cook it and roast it. They would have bought some grain. They didn't put any leaven in it, but they bought some grain and they would have cooked it in haste. And while the lamb and the unleavened bread was being cooked, they'd have went and bought some bitter herbs. Some store downtown had the bitter herbs on sale, I'm sure. They'd have bought the bitter herbs, and they'd have brought it. They'd have cleaned up the upper room. They'd have got everything ready for Jesus and the disciples to observe the Passover feast. It was a big deal. It would be like Grandma cooking Thanksgiving dinner. It would be like Grandpa buying fireworks for the 4th of July. It would be like Mom and Dad buying Christmas presents, sort of. Roll a bunch of holidays together. That's what it would have been like. So Jesus gathered the 12 in the upper room, all ready for the Passover feast. Now listen to Luke 22, verse 14. And when the hour came, Jesus reclined at the table, and the apostles were with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired, and the Greek says longingly longed, I really, really wanted to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I'll not eat of it again until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus wanted to share this precious holiday with his 12 guys. It was a poignant moment. It was a precious meal. It was an evening that they would remember. Now, at the highlight of that evening, when they were reliving their escape from the 10th plague, when they were thinking about their hasty departure from Egypt, when they were remembering the bitterness of slavery, Jesus changed the script, and he forgot the bitter herbs. What? Look in verse 19, Luke 22. Jesus took the bread, that's the unleavened bread, the bread of haste, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. What? No longer the haste, but now the body. And likewise, he took the cup, and when he had blessed it, saying, the cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. Not remembering the blood of the doorpost so much anymore. It's the blood of a new covenant. But what does he not say? There's no bitter herbs. Now on the plate in front of Jesus would have been bones of the lamb, and the cup in front of him would have been the wine. On the plate in front of him would have been unleavened bread, and I guarantee you there'd have been some bitter herbs laying right there. He used the wine. He used the bread. He forgot the bitter herbs. Thus our mini mystery. What happened to the bitter herbs? So actually, our mini mystery is, why did Jesus not use the symbol of the bitter herbs as something else? Why didn't Jesus transform, like he did the wine, like he did the bread, why didn't he transform the bitter herbs into something else? He remembers the blood. He remembers the bread. He did not use the bitter herbs. Well, I think I know why. Seriously? Somebody say seriously. Seriously? Seriously? I think I can solve our mini mystery. Follow this line of thought. In the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, God walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening. I love that line. After their sin, God no longer walked with them like he did before. There was a distance that grew between God and humans. The story of the Old Testament is a story of a God who wants a people to love him, but it's the story of the people who did not love God in return. The story of the Old Testament is a sad story. The story of the Old Testament is a bitter herbs story. The world devolves from the Garden of Eden to the days of Noah. The world gets rebooted. Certainly that's very bitter herbs. There's a great guy named Abraham who is faithful to his Lord, but there's still this overhanging bitterness. Someday your descendant will fix all this, but there's this overhanging bitterness. Moses is called by God. He gathers the people into a new nation. He even builds a tabernacle, and in that tabernacle there's a holy place with the Ark of the Covenant and the Shekinah. And God dwelt in the Ark of the Covenant, in the Shekinah. He kind of was back with his people, but not walking in the cool of the evening. Solomon follows suit, builds a temple for the presence of God. And throughout the time of the judges and the kings, there's lots of bitter herb stories. God's people continued to move away from their God. In the exile to Babylon, certainly there's bitter herbs. They've moved a long way from their God. And when they return and build the temple again, guess what? There's no presence of God at all. The Old Testament is a story of bitter herbs. All the way down to the days of Jesus. But in that moment, in that precious moment, in that poignant evening, when Jesus forgets the bitter herbs, because in the new covenant, the covenant cut with his blood, God will dwell with his people again. Bam! Mini mystery solved. Jesus leaves the bitter herbs on the plate because the dwelling of God is once again with his people in the new covenant. Listen to Jeremiah 31. This is what Jeremiah prophesied. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant I had with them before, when the fathers, on that day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, even though I wanted to be their husband, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law where? Within them. And I'll write it on their hearts. And I'll be their God. And they shall be my people, declares the Lord. There are no bitter herbs in the new covenant because God dwells with his people. Listen to Joel chapter 2. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit where? On all flesh. The sons and daughters shall be prophesied. The old men shall dream dreams. The young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female servants in those days, I'll pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and the earth, and blood and fire and columns of smoke. And the sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. The next day, after the upper room, after the forgotten herbs, Jesus dies to create a new covenant. 3 days later, he arose to life again to vindicate his words. 50 days after that, on the next Jewish holiday, the holiday of the Pentecost, Peter quotes Joel, Acts chapter 2. But Peter, standing with 11, lifted up his voice and addressed them, Men of Judea, and all who dwell in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and give ear to the words, for these men are not drunk, as some of you suppose. It's only 9 a.m, but this is what was uttered by the prophet Joel. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. There are no bitter herbs in the new covenant, because God pours out His Spirit on all flesh. Listen to the conclusion of the book of Hebrews in Hebrews 10, verses 19 through 22. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that He opened for us through the curtain that is His flesh, and since we have a great house a great priest over the house of God, here's the conclusion. Therefore, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith. There's no bitter herbs in the new covenant, because we can draw near to God. Mini mystery solved.